Hello everyone, it's time for another Mannequin of the Month video. Of course it's the 1st of October 2019 and the Mannequin of the Month for October is this, taking a look at some more Commonwealth kit. This is Canadian and this mannequin represents the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, the 2nd Battalion, on their deployment to Cyprus in 1967, or certainly en route to Cyprus in 1967. It draws together some older and newer bits of Canadian kit from that time period. And as usual, we'll start at the top and work down, and then we'll move the mannequin around and have a look at what's on the sides and the back and so forth. Starting at the top, we have the M1 helmet. This had been introduced into Canadian service, I believe, in 1960. This has an olive drab, a plain green helmet cover over the top of it, but as clearly shown in photos of the time, a camouflage pattern has been applied. Now, the photographs of the time I've been able to find are all black and white, so I've somewhat inferred the camouflage colours from those. So we have a tan added and a black to give a splodgy camouflage effect. Some of the photographs of the period actually show quite elaborate painted geometric camouflage patterns, generally officers, whereas the men tend to just have splodge paint, and then obviously it's held on with the helmet band, the elastic helmet band there. So, as I say, quite an interesting expedient, I guess, to produce camouflage helmet covers from the OD examples they had at the time. Moving down, the basic uniform is the combat coat from the Canadian combat suit. Of course, the Queen's Own Rifles deployed to Cyprus are shown wearing combat uniform when emplaning. And this is a modified combat coat. So this isn't the very first pattern. This is a modified example with a turned down collar. The initial type just had a stand-up collar, lined in corduroy. We'll talk more about the combat uniform in a separate video, of course, but run over a few of the little details here. This is the modified version, which appears, the earliest example I've seen is 1965, so 1967 it's not out of there are one or two that show up in photos, although most men do have the earlier type, which I don't unfortunately yet have an example of. The uniform is made of a cotton nylon mix in this green, I believe with OD is the official, olive drab is the official term, but this green finish. Large buttons, obviously attached with a loop of cloth rather than just being sewn on, something that would influence British clothing in the 1990s. And it's a very durable, heavyweight garment. Obviously you have an extra layer of cloth over the shoulders there. The pockets are interesting in that they're of course designed to carry magazines for the self-loading rifle, the Canadian C1, which is an interesting part of the design and something we'll get into more when we talk about this in conjunction with the later 1964 pattern web equipment. So that's the combat coat. The web equipment being worn is a very stripped down version of the 1951 pattern. You literally have belt and haversack, and the belt's just being used to support the bayonet, as we'll see in a minute. So very light load of web equipment, and as I say, that's basically what they're seen in planing with is this. And most of their kit, of course, would be packed up in kit bags and suitcases and so forth for transit purposes. So what the men are actually carrying on themselves is very limited. It's very much akin to photos of British troops at a similar time, wearing just the kidney pouches and the 1958 pattern belt, carrying small kit with them that they'll need, and the rest of their kit being packed up in kit bags, etc., to be transported. Anyway, we'll move this around now and we'll have a look at the left-hand side. Looking at the left-hand side of the mannequin here, you can perhaps better see the painted camouflage effect on the helmet cover there, with the tan and black added to give something of a destructive pattern to that. Moving down, we can also see the insignia that was worn. We have, show a close-up of this as well, of course. We have the Queen's Own Rifle shoulder title on a slip-on epaulette here, which was the standard way that insignia was supposed to be used worn with combat uniform. But in addition to that, we have a carryover from the old bush uniform, which is the armlet in Canadian terminology, brassard in British terminology, which carries the insignia in full colour, the Queen's Own Rifle embroidered shoulder title there. And then we have the formation sign of the Canadian 25th Infantry Brigade, which no longer existed at this point. In fact, it hadn't done for many years, over 10 years. But this was still worn as a national identifier by some Canadian troops on foreign deployments. So that's what it's being worn for here. As I say, the brigade no longer existed, and this does not show the troops as being part of the brigade. It's simply a way of displaying national affiliation on the uniform in full colour. Bit of esprit de corps, I think, there in wearing full colour insignia with this on their way out of country. Here you can see a close-up of the insignia worn on the left arm and shoulder, and it's interesting to see the mix of combat-specific insignia here in the shoulder insignia, coupled with the full colour insignia worn on the earlier armlet. Obviously we can see here a little bit more detail of combat uniform too. You can see the large lower pockets, and these of course have loops in them to take further magazines, as well as the small chest pockets. And we can see the web belt coming around here with the later pattern frog for the self-loading rifle bayonet, which you can see there. This is actually a British example, but it serves the purpose of illustration. Obviously it would be the bayonet for the C1 rifle. We'll move this around now and take a look at the back. Looking at the back here, we can see the haversack from the Canadian 1951 pattern web equipment, and this of course was being superseded at this point by the 1964 pattern, but many troops still had the 1951 pattern. It would take quite some time for the changeover to take place in full. This of course is just carried on the L-straps over the shoulders. There's nothing supporting it otherwise. There's no prescribed contents I've been able to find for this. If anyone knows, I'd be interested to find out. But I imagine, given the fact that the mess tin pouch and the canteen carrier aren't being carried, that they would both be in there, and then probably wash kit and maybe a cardigan as well, the sweater, rather, the 5-button sweater, which Canada was using by this point, basically the American 5-button sweater. So that is what I would imagine to be the haversack contents, but if anyone has more detail on what would be carried at this time in this sort of transitory period of going from home station out to Cyprus, I'd be interested to know. But that is the haversack carried on the back, and you can just see the back of the belt here with the buckles. Obviously nothing supporting the belt, it's just sat on the hips purely in order to carry the bayonet. Looking at the right hand side of the mannequin here, we can again see the insignia, and we have the Queen's Own Rifles, the QOR title on the epaulette there, and then we have the Queen's Own Rifles full colour embroidered shoulder title, beneath which we have the United Nations patch or badge. This of course being a United Nations peacekeeping deployment, and again these are just worn on the armlet from the old bush uniform, again to give a bit of full colour insignia to the combat uniform for this deployment. Here we can see the insignia worn on the right, and again it's an interesting mix of the epaulette with the QOR shoulder title, designed for use with combat uniform, and the old armlet with full colour insignia. So there we have the Mannequin of the Month for October 2019. As I say, I've been really pleased to get this kit together. I like the development of combat uniform. I think second to web equipment, it's one of my favourite areas of development post Second World War. The US with their M1943 evolving post-war into the M1951 and so forth, and the British introducing it in Korea, then developing from there. Obviously they had a trials example before that, and then Canada coming up with their own design, Australia essentially having their bush uniform, their jungle green uniform, but worn with additional American combat clothing items until the 1980s when their disruptive pattern camouflage uniform came out. So it's an interesting development, it's an interesting history, the fact they moved to the combat uniform away from things like battle dress and so forth. And this is an example of that, and I really like the Canadian combat uniform. It's a very interesting design, slightly odd thinking behind it, which we'll get into when we talk about it some more. But to get this mannequin together has been very satisfying. Ever since I've seen the photographs of it, of the uniform being worn in this manner, I've been interested to put it together, and it's nice to be able to do so. So that is, as I say, 2nd Battalion Queen's Own Rifles of Canada on their way to Cyprus in 1967. So an interesting little bit of Cold War history there. Obviously, also an interesting piece of the end of the British Empire, and obviously all the ramifications that had, let's say. So there it is. I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. I've certainly gone over everything on the mannequin there. If you like the videos I produce, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't done already. Obviously the subscribe button's down below, and there's a little bell next to that. If you click that, you'll be notified when I upload future videos as well. There's also a Facebook and an Instagram page. There will be photographs of this up on both, showing more detail. And also, if you really like my uploads and you'd like to support the channel, there is a Patreon page as well, which is being very generously supported by some of my viewers, and I'm very, very grateful to them for that. There's also a PayPal donation link. If you want to just make a one-time donation, you can also do that. Links to both of those in the description as well. But as I said before, that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. So until next time, bye for now.